Well, good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to this webinar. I'm delighted that you've been able to join us, and we've got an hour together. We're going to be looking today at identifying the best models for delivering rail station and associated infrastructure. My name is Jonathan Chatfield. I'm the Head of Railway Strategy and Policy at Rail Delivery Group, and delighted to be hosting this webinar. We've got three excellent speakers that we'll be hearing from shortly, and then there will be an opportunity after that for questions. And these webinars work really well when we get lots of questions flowing. So please do, as you're listening to the three presentations, please be thinking about those questions that you can put into the Q&A function at the bottom. Feel free to give your name and organization if you want to. And I'll be sort of leading us through those questions. So keep putting those in the Q&A and we can have a really good discussion as well. So what are we doing in this particular webinar? So we're looking at establishing partnerships. That is fundamentally important for delivering these projects. We're looking at unlocking regeneration. We're looking at how to engage more effectively with stakeholders and ensure really successful project delivery. So that's what we're doing. I mean, why are we doing it? I think we're doing it because a lot of us are very passionate about stations and passionate about this sort of development. But it's not stations in and of themselves and development in and of itself. It's very much about what that actually does. It's the economic growth, it's connecting people, it's building and enhancing communities. That's why we're doing it. And we need to just get better at this, don't we? I think we're all aware, as the Chancellor is telling us, money is very tight. There's going to be a lot of change in the rail industry in particular in the next few years. So we just need to become more effective and better at doing this, which is why a webinar like this is so useful. So that's what we're doing and why we're doing. A little bit on the logistics. I'm going to introduce our first speaker very shortly. As I say, we've got three speakers and then we've got Q&A and questions. So that's the plan. And we'll get going because time is short. Our first speaker is Richard Ford. Richard is partner at Pinsent Masons. Richard specializes in major planning, compulsory purchase, highways and environment law projects. Richard, you've got a lot of experience on major station development. I know Stratford International, HS2 stations at Birmingham International, Old Oak Common, Euston and Ebbsfleet. And I think you've been working on Dubai Metro recently as well. So you've got international as well as domestic experience, which is great. So Richard, I'll hand over to you and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. So my talk today, I'll just put it on a slideshow. My talk today is about public-private participation on collaboration structures to deliver rail station master plans. So a number of projects I've been involved in over the last few years and working on currently: Stratford City, Kiwi Park in London, obviously on the back of the Olympics, but now the Legacy project, Old Oak Common, Birmingham HS2 Interchange Station with Arden Cross Master Plan, York Central, Ebbsfleet and Warrington Bank Quay as part of the new Northern Powerhouse Rail project. What's defining about all of these projects is that they are public-private partnership arrangements. So I've got four key areas just to touch on in my 10 minutes. A whole range of key stakeholders involved in rail station master plans. So you've got obviously the client team around Network Rail, you've got train operating companies, which we'll hear from later on Chiltern Rail, lots of public sector stakeholders, private stakeholders and community interests. So how do we put them all together to deliver rail station master plans? So often on these projects, we set up a key stakeholder board, a project board, to get the inception of the project right from the get-go, involving where you have a mayor, LEPs, local authorities, with the businesses, with the landowners, the developers, or potential developers looking to soft market test the master plan around the station itself, obviously Network Rail and the train operating companies, and importantly, not to be forgotten about, utility and infrastructure providers, particularly power issues and heat networks. So any rail station project obviously is centred around the station, so Network Rail are fundamental to that and everything that they do. So the point of public-private stakeholder collaboration, four key areas: reducing costs, creating enhanced shared value. So particularly when there is actual pooling of planning and infrastructure design, cost reduction by working together, environmental, EIA, sustainability strategies, pooling the best of everyone's strategies together for a cohesive master plan scheme. Looking at leveraging investment, particularly from public sector, but also the power of joining forces for the purposes of borrowing. We'll come on to some ability to have income stream and securitization of income stream on these projects, which helps forward fund some of the infrastructure. And the point is shared value capture, not land value capture in the sense of public sector is depreciating the land value and grabbing it for the public sector benefit, but shared value with landowners, developers, Network Rail, train operating companies, and the public sector all benefiting. Speeding up delivery, particularly looking at the benefits of growth, leveraging that collaboration to government, ensuring that it's an area for 100% local retention of business rates, looking for Homes England funding for residential components of the master plan, the new National Wealth Fund as part of the reforms that the Labour government's made, the National Infrastructure Bank looking at infrastructure funding, digital twin funding from DESNZ to do digital station master plans, which I'll touch on. And then leveraging the design, energy, net zero, nature recovery, biodiversity objective expertise of the stakeholders. So we're looking at funding agreements, JV partnerships, procurement models, sub-regional infrastructure delivery agreements, revolving infrastructure agreements, which is cash that comes into the project and then receipts roll back into the project rather than go back to Treasury. Leveraging government-backed guarantees. So, for example, in Nine Elms, on the back of the Jubilee Line extension station, government-backed guarantee helped unlock that. So Homes England and National Wealth Fund looking at government-backed guarantee arrangements for station master plans going forward. And then that shared value capture that I talked about, and the private sector obviously bringing in lots of expertise, land development expertise, skills, training programs and the like. So that was sort of the background. And then a range of special purpose vehicles to deliver master plans. So partnership arrangements, development companies that the council own and then involve those stakeholders, strategic place partnerships, urban regeneration companies, public-private JVs, and new structures for locally led development corporations. So all of these examples built around station projects. So diagram just to illustrate the point. On the left-hand side, the big blue box, Station Master Plan SPV, with a funder and looking for development and asset management and holding life cycle arrangements with local authority or mayor, developer, institutional investor, Network Rail, and the master plan area operators operating assets like BTR operators, for example. Getting backing from on the top there, National Wealth Fund, MHCLG, Homes England, guarantees, grant funding, or loan equity stakes. That SPV then delivers the scheme, and the scheme is a station, obviously, the master plan around the station, transit-orientated development, as it's called globally, and town regeneration arising. And then out of that scheme is the benefits of growth that goes into a town city development fund. So there's a return on investment, obviously, for the SPV, but the growth from SIL receipts, local retention of business rates, 106, things like that, then gets recycled back into the projects and into the town. And then the local authority partner comes into that JV either from the beginning, just as a facilitator, planning authority or the like, or if they have land or equity to put into the project, then they have a land or equity stake in the group, and they obviously help coordinate the local working groups. So that's a sort of model structure that we've devised for a number of these projects. Just to touch on a new kid on the block, which is a locally led urban development corporation. Lots of the projects that I'm involved in at the moment, bidding for cash to do city centre, town centre, city centre regeneration schemes around rail station projects, are looking at this structure. The Levelling Up Act from 2023, taken forward by MHCLG to put together a locally led urban DevCorp structure where you have an independent set of board members alongside the local authority, and then you have an oversight authority, which is the local authority having oversight of this structure. And the whole point is to devise a public-private partnership structure to deliver projects. So that's has powers of land assembly, has powers of finance raising, it has equity raising powers, revenue, income, and lots of useful powers to help deliver these projects, alongside, of course, the important powers that Network Rail have for the stations themselves. So the third of the 4 areas I wanted to touch on was obviously the huge importance of engaging with Network Rail. They have an absolutely excellent design manual, Master Planning at Stations. It's really good. And the first thing I say to clients is read the manual, because it explains how to engage with Network Rail throughout the life cycle of the project. Importantly, what kind of station is the station? Is it an A, B, C, D, E, or F station? What, therefore, are the facilities required? That's going to generate the footfall, which is going to help the master plan. You then, of course, need to be familiar with the pace and grip processes. So this is important to understand how Network Rail operates, so grip 1 to grip 8, throughout the process of strategic development and project selection, development and design, delivery and operation. Obviously, you'll also need to understand how the train operating company requirements fit into this. So you engage with Network Rail through your delivery structures with the TOCs involved, understanding the station constraints. So obviously you look at constraints to start with. Then you're looking at defining the issues, the requirements, and the aspirations of the station. So very important, spatial issues, project requirements, station forecourt, access, security, all of these things are very important. Then you're moving into inclusive design, technology, and sustainability matters, which are obviously fundamental to any major master plan project. And then the opportunities, not just the constraints. Network Rail are creative, understand the opportunities and the benefits of station projects to the host city or town. So, again, I commend the manual to you. And then the last topic I just want to touch on is a lot of the station master plans I'm now doing are using digital tools. So they start off as digital twins, because East West Rail, for example, HS2, they've all got digital models of their projects. And if you start off with a digital twin in design, and then you plug that into construction, then you have something ready-made for asset management and operational phase, and then you can overlay things which I'll quickly touch on. So for those of you familiar with BIM or Revit or CAD models, you have a parent portal for the project, a parent digital twin that you import these kind of BIM and Revit and CAD models into, and then you capture information with a data platform overlay. So it's digital strategy, digital master plan, digital construction, and I just wanted to quickly end with digital asset management and data monetization. So this is important for income generation out of master plans, which obviously helps maintain the asset once built, but also brings stakeholders together and produces income which can be securitized for forward funding. So it's about digital twins, it's about apps, it's about data sharing via data company or data trust or data store. It's about digital master planning, asset management, integration of digital twins for training of workforce for Network Rail and TOCs, with digital twins for the running of the station. So there's a sort of 10-step process. You have a data strategy at the beginning of the project. You master plan your project using a digital twin. You evolve that. You get the planning information in. You refine the scheme. You then obtain planning. You use the model for pre-lets, pre-sales, investor interest, funding interest. You then start on your construction and you capture that information from your construction supply chain into the parent model. And then you've ended up with a ability to have a digital tool for monetization of data, tracking of performance of asset, footfall, advertising, lots of use cases available to you. So you whiteboard these projects using a whiteboard like this. You get your consultant and professional client team together and you rapidly prototype the master plan. You overlay, like King's Cross have done, an app, special offers and discounts for people, cashback rewards for customers, for visitors, restaurant bookings, leisure, those kind of things. BTR operators use this kind of kit for build-to-rent services to their residents. And then you make money out of it through digital advertising revenue, partnership premiums to be on the app, transaction clicks revenue, if you've got a digital twin because you've patiently built it up, utilisation rights, naming, branding, sponsorship rights, and you can even move into games, so augmented reality games, insect trails, planet trails, dinosaur trails, and virtual reality goggle experiences. All of the projects that I'm working on now are looking at these tools to develop the master plan. And then finally, just to indicate that there are other income streams out of station master plan schemes. So the one I've just talked about is this sort of blue box there, profit share from data, trust stores, apps, gaming services. But there is profit share from renewable energy microgrids, decentralized production of heat through, electricity and heat through air source and PV, for example. So you can generate some of your energy and then sell that to customer and take a profit share. Fiber, EV charging, events within public realm spaces around the station master plan. So we're looking at that for Liverpool Lime Street Station at the moment, for example. Car clubs, e-bike deals, estate landlord income, obviously, habitat bank income if you've got more surplus biodiversity net gain, parking revenue and advertising revenue, and the like. So that was just to give you a flavour of the type of thing that we're doing in the market at the moment. And it's quite active because we've got Northern Powerhouse rail stations, we've got East-West rail stations, obviously finalising HS2 stations, as well as, town and city centre regen programmes around stations. So that's my slot, and hopefully that's been a sort of helpful overview. And back to Jonathan.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. That's given us a great start to this webinar. And I think, you've done a great job there at kind of showing us some of the complexities of these projects, but also how you can navigate your way through. Reminder about questions. Please do drop your questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen as we go along. And our second speaker of the three this morning is Zach Bailey. Zach is Regional Growth Manager at Chiltern Railways. Zach leads on stakeholder engagement there for Chiltern, looking at, amongst other things, construction of East-West Rail, first stage of Oxford to Milton Keynes. It's going to take you a while to get to Cambridge, where I am, Zach, but you're going to get here eventually, aren't you, I think, on East-West Rail. But you've also been involved in Midland Rail Hub project and Birmingham Moor Street as well. You were a graduate, I think, at Transport for London, and then worked across London Underground and Elizabeth Line before joining Chiltern. But Zach, over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for the nice introduction. So today I'm going to talk from kind of a train operator's perspective, talk about kind of the model that we've been using since the pandemic, and also touch on a couple of case studies in terms of sort of station upgrades that we're delivering at the moment. For anybody who's not familiar with Chiltern Railways, a little bit of an introduction. So Chiltern's been running sort of commuter and passenger services from London up to Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire and the West Midlands since the late 90s. We previously, and our previous owners, invested in brand new stations in areas such as Warwick and Ainsworth Vale Parkway. We also opened the brand new Oxford to London Marylebone route in 2015. We're also working closely with the Department for Transport to be the operator of the first stage of East-West Rail services between Oxford and Milton Keynes. We've not yet been formally appointed as the operator, but we're doing some work behind the scenes to help mobilise and to do some testing on that route. In terms of kind of where Chiltern is at the moment, we're currently operating on a national rail contract, as are many train operators in the country, following the pandemic and obviously the shock in terms of customer numbers in the pandemic. And as part of this process, we agree an annual business plan and a cost budget with the Department for Transport. And I think one of the things I'm going to touch on today is in the current operating model, the current way that a number of train operators are running, a lot of our investment, a lot of our budgets are done on an annual basis. So working at how we can kind of adapt to that new model, adapt to some of the constraints that come with sort of direct public sector funding, to really deliver sort of station master plans over a number of years. Next slide, please. So in terms of kind of our development model, as I said before, under our national rail contract, we're quite heavily reliant on public sector funding. And obviously there's lots of different priorities for the public purse, whether that's the NHS, whether that's schools. So what we've done is sort of recognising these constraints, we've been focusing on developing multi-stage improvement plans. And these are plans and sort of station upgrades and improvement projects that can be delivered over several years, as opposed to trying to rebuild or create one large master plan in one go. I think the funding sort of envelope has completely changed. We're very much focused on delivering sort of small scale improvements that can be delivered over several years. To deliver these plans, and I'll come on to talk about several case studies at places like Banbury and London Marylebone, we formed joint working groups working with key partners, both from a public sector perspective, so working with kind of key local authority partners at different levels in our areas, but also working with some of our third parties and commercial partners. And the point of these kind of working groups is really to agree common deliverables, to kind of establish a master plan and kind of a common vision, both for the station, but also that area that connects the station to the town or the city that it serves, to really come up with sort of how we want that station, how we want the local area to work in the future, and how we can deliver complementary schemes, whether that is housing schemes, whether that's commercial developments that are happening in and around the railway, but making sure we really think about how those schemes fit in with the railway and how we can utilise third party and other funding, such as Section 106 contributions, to really improve the railway infrastructure that these housing estates or the commercial developments depend on. Next slide, please. So first case study I was going to talk about is Banbury Station. For anybody who's been there, the facilities at the station date back to about the late 1950s. Due to a lot of growth across the Chiltern network in sort of the early 2000s and 2010s, the station facilities have been quite quickly outdated. The station itself is built on an overbridge above a number of platforms. As a result, there's a number of capacity constraints, as well as the fact that the customer experience is not really fit for purpose. So to kind of respond to this, since the pandemic, we've brought together a local stakeholder group, obviously working with Network Rail as a station owner, who also have got a number of sort of colleague facilities, and there's a large maintenance depot at the site at Banbury, but also working with 3 tiers of local government in the area. So working with Oxfordshire County Council, working with Cherwell District Council, and also the local town council to help form and formulate a local regeneration plan for the area. Particularly, the station is about half a mile from the town centre. At the moment, the area is quite socially deprived. It's sort of an old industrial estate, which is kind of degenerated over the years. As a result, your first kind of view when you come to Banbury is quite a socially deprived area. There's lots of old industrial units. It's not the best kind of vision for the kind of the town centre and for that customer experience. So we formed this local group and this local stakeholder working group, and we've identified and we're delivering a series of projects, to improve the station, but also to improve the links that the station has to the town centre. So earlier this year, Oxfordshire County Council, as you can see in the image in the top right-hand corner, have started delivering a 10.5 million active travel and public access programme. And this will provide new road access, new bus connections, and to bring bus services into the station forecourt, but also new walking and cycling paths to the town centre to really encourage active travel between new housing estates and existing housing units and the station. From our perspective, and as I said before, we've secured some government funding as part of our annual business plan cycles. This is really around improving and upgrading some of those customer facilities. As I said, our model is really a stage model, so we focused on 2 or 3 areas over this financial year. Then we'll apply for another section of funding next financial year. Some of the things that we're doing and delivering at the moment, as you can see on the bottom right-hand corner, we've upgraded and delivered a brand new cafe and seating area, so customers have got somewhere warm, but also somewhere to buy and to spend money in terms of commercial revenue into the railway. We've upgraded the toilets, and we're also delivering a full repaint of the internal of the station. And it's really about kind of delivering those upgrades over a staged process. Yes, there's limited funding in the railway industry, but we can still go ahead and deliver a number of schemes to improve that customer experience at the station. And I think one of the other things that there's obviously a big focus at the moment is in terms of driving additional commercial revenue. Obviously, all of our revenue goes directly into the Treasury, and the rail industry as a whole has got a big net subsidy coming from government. It's about £2 billion a year. So yes, it's good to upgrade customer facilities, but we also need to think about how we can improve that commercial revenue and bring more income into the government purse. So that's kind of what we've done in the short term, what we're delivering over the next couple of years. We're also looking at delivering a local area plan with Network Rail, but also with the local councils around how we can really improve the overall site in Banbury in the medium to long term. So this is particularly focused on the District Council in Cherwell, looking at creating a new sort of leisure housing development in the area between the station and the town centre. And I guess from an operator's perspective, we're looking at how does that development fit with the station, and what potential funding could we get in terms of Section 106 or other planning conditions to really improve and deliver that next set of projects. And some of the things that we're sort of looking to do include refurbishing the lower ticket hall at Banbury, but also providing new waiting rooms at the platform level. So yeah, that's a good summary of kind of what we've got planned and what we're delivering at Banbury, but also looking to the medium to long term and working with the local authorities to develop that vision for the area around Banbury Station. Next slide, please. The other case study I was going to talk to you about today was London Marylebone. For those I'm sure have been to London Marylebone, it's a Grade 2 listed station. It's a beautiful old building that was built in the late 1800s. However, it last underwent major redevelopment in 2006 when we added 2 new platforms to the station. But because of the level of growth across the network, including opening the new London to Oxford route in 2015, the station is now no longer fit for purpose. We've got some quite significant operational problems, which include sort of overcrowding in the ticket hall, particularly when we have sort of event days, including Wembley events. We serve about 40 Wembley events a year by rail. But also if there's disruption on either the Great Western route to Oxford or the West Coast Main Line, and we become kind of the operator in terms of ticket acceptance, the gate line can get very congested and crowded, and you can end up with a lot of people, and people just aren't moving through the station the way we want them to, which obviously delays the boarding and the lighting process. There's obviously that knock-on performance impact. So recognizing some of these kind of customer constraints and operational constraints, we're working with a stakeholder group again to deliver a phased improvement plan. This includes working with Network Rail as the station owner, but also commercial third parties, including the Football Association, who are delivering obviously a number of Wembley events a year in terms of football and concerts, but they're also delivering Euro 2028. And one of the things that we're working with them to do is to see whether or not we can utilise any funding as a sort of a nationally significant event to improve some of the operational facilities at the gate line, whether that would be applying and getting funding to enhance our gate line or to really improve the management of people through the station by investing in a new customer information screen. It's really about kind of thinking outside the box, I guess, in terms of that funding model and in terms of that innovation of where we can get that level of funding into the industry. As I said before, one of the other things we're always thinking about as part of this sort of development model is where we can bring additional commercial revenue. So all these schemes and the developments that we're proposing, we're really thinking about, yes, how can we improve facilities for customers, but also how can we bring additional revenue into the industry. As I'm sure you've all seen the customer information screens at Euston Station. One of the things we're looking at is if we reinvest and improve our customer information screens, which will obviously improve the movement of people through the station and boarding and lighting. But it also could be a site for new advertising screens, which would bring new commercial revenue into the station. So that's kind of a bit of a summary of some of the things we're doing at London Marylebone, but also how we're working with third parties, including the Football Association, to really think outside the box and deliver that medium to long-term improvement at the station. Next slide, please. And then last but not least, I just thought I'd touch on one of the future schemes and future developments that we're working on at the moment. So you can see on the top right-hand corner, Oxford United football team has submitted planning permission to build a new 16,000-seat stadium at land very close and adjacent to our existing station at Oxford Parkway. This is a very new station. It was opened 10 years ago in 2015. However, the station itself and also the wider site, which includes a park and ride site operated by Oxford County Council, doesn't have the capacity and isn't designed to host up to 10,000 fans wanting to use both rail services into Oxford and other destinations, including the future East West Rail Link, but also connecting bus services on proposed future match days. So to kind of look at what facilities and how we can improve and develop a plan for the new stadium, we formed a working group with Oxford United as the developer, with the local authorities and also the bus operators that operate on the site, to propose a set of improvements, but also to utilise funding from this development to improve Oxford Parkway and the wider park and ride site. So some of the interventions that we're looking at include improving the access from the road, so customers can obviously walk, or potentially putting in a ramp. So if you've got mobility impaired customers, they can get from the station to the stadium, but also to cater for that large number of people who'll be using the walkways on match days. We're also looking at sort of interventions to really improve and I guess decarbonise journeys to the station. So whether or not that's putting in additional cycle parking so people can cycle to the station, but also cycle to games at the stadium, or additional electrical vehicle charging. So if people are driving and parking at Parkway for football matches, they've got that ability to bring their electric vehicle along. And I guess we're working with partners to try and complement that and complement the infrastructure that they're hoping to put in. So Oxford County Council are also working on a proposal to put in a new cycle route running from Oxford Parkway through to Oxford City Centre as part of the development. And that really kind of diversifies the offering to really improve the site, but also bring additional people to the stadium, but also onto the rail network by sustainable travel means. And I guess in terms of the long term, we're working closely with Oxford United to put in a Section 106 application as part of the planning process. And that really focuses on some sort of tangible updates in terms of improving facilities at the station and upgrading the station to ensure it can cope with potentially 5,000 people using it on match days, whether that's creating new queuing systems or additional access points to get to the platforms because there's capacity constraints on the current gate line or the overbridge, or that's improving existing facilities, whether that's putting additional waiting shelters on the platforms or enhancing toilet provision. So yeah, that's kind of a summary of what's going on at Oxford United. And if the planning permission goes ahead, hopefully we can secure some funding to improve the station. So yeah, to bring it to a conclusion, as I said before, due to the pandemic and the current contractual model for train operators, there's a limited amount of funding coming into the rail industry. As a result, we've adapted to this model and we're focusing on creating and working with partners to deliver staged improvement plans that can be delivered in our annual business cycle, but also we can secure funding over a number of years. We're also working closely with local authorities and third parties to ensure that our station developments can be linked with public transport, but also active travel schemes to better connect our stations to town centres, to commercial developments and housing estates. Thank you for that, and back to you, Jonathan.
That's great. Thank you very much, Zach. Really great to see those case studies, and it really brings the subject to life, doesn't it, when you see those pictures and hear about actual live case studies. So really appreciate that. Our third and final speaker this morning is Rebecca Crowe. Rebecca's Development Director at Grainger, who are a leading investor developer in build-to-rent housing. And Rebecca's got a lot of experience of particularly focusing on brownfield regeneration sites, and I think one of those being at Newbury Station as well. But Rebecca, over to you.
Well, thanks, Jonathan. Hello, everyone. So yes, I'm kind of coming here today, I suppose, from to sort of summarise how housing and new housing, specifically build-to-rent housing, can contribute and play a role in wider rail station redevelopment. Next slide, please. So just to spend a quick overview of Grainger for those who may not be familiar with us. We are one of the UK's leading providers of build-to-rent homes. So we do the full cycle of development. So we acquire land, we develop it for build-to-rent housing, and then we are the landlord who retains the rental housing for the long term. So we have about just over 11,000 homes in operation that we are under our management across the UK, and we have a kind of a pipeline of about just getting towards 5,000 homes. So, and I think a key part of our business is we are very comfortable and very kind of willing and able to work in partnership with both public and private in public and private sector partnerships. Next slide, please. And then we are UK wide, so there's other than Scotland, we kind of do work geographically across the country. So this is just giving an overview of kind of, you know, where our current assets and management schemes under management are. So a good geographic distribution. Next slide, please. And then in terms of partnerships, next slides, please. As I said before, we do see ourselves as a kind of a good partner, and we are an experienced partner working. We've got 7 public sector partnerships, and some of our key partners are summarised below. So TfL and like London Pension Funds, the Ministry of Defence, local authorities, Lewisham Council, and then also Network Rail and Great Western Railway have been partners of ours, both live partners of ours and partners in the past. And then this is just a summary, I suppose, of kind of some of the scale of some of the projects we're working on. So in terms of this, next slide, please. So yeah, we're working, this is just touching on, I suppose, that 2 of our live partnership structures are focused on rail station development. So I just wanted to go into a bit more detail on both of these. So the first one is a case study. We have a multi-site joint venture via a JV company with Transport for London. So that is currently actively developing 5 sites adjacent to rail infrastructure or above tube stations or adjacent to tube stations in London. So this joint venture is, I'll go into that in a bit more detail. And the second one, which is less of a kind of a JV in nature, but more sort of a partnership development, is a scheme that we have recently completed, which was a long-term partnership with West Berkshire Council and Network Rail, and also Great Western Railway as a train operating company adjacent to Newbury Station in Berkshire. So next slide, please. So in terms of kind of where we see the benefits for both from both sides of the spectrum, from a developer, private operator, and also public sector partners, we see that there is definitely a lot of shared and benefits of a joint venture, and especially from a long-term investor build to rent operator, because build to rent operators are there for the long term. They invest into communities for 10 years plus. So I think that naturally leads itself to close alignment with rail related schemes because of the long-term nature that we are able to take. So it allows us to align from the start objectives and commitments to the scheme and the communities, and investment into infrastructure that you might not be able to do in kind of typical for sale schemes where there is an exit point for the developer on completion of the scheme. So that there are long-term partnerships. We are very comfortable with taking 10 to kind of 30-year view on schemes and income and investment into elements of the scheme. And there's, depending on the appetite of our partners, there can be equal share of risk and revenue, or anywhere along that spectrum, depending on what the objectives are of the partners and the risk appetite, I suppose. And then I suppose with the benefits of build to rent, if again, depending on objectives, is that there is the ability for the partner involved to take a long-term income stream from the build to rent element of the scheme to reinvest back into the rail network, which we can touch on a little bit when we go into a bit more detail about our TfL joint venture. So next slide, please. So yeah, the first case study I just wanted to touch on a bit more detail is the joint venture we have with Transport for London, which is called, the JV is called Connected Living London, and it is a 51%, 49% joint venture between Grainger and Transport for London that we have named Connected Living London as the operating name. So this joint venture has been established since 2009, when TfL went out to the market really via a competitive procurement process, because they had really done an exercise of looking at the kind of how they can best make use of land next to their assets, and decided that kind of a part of their wider business strategy was that they wanted to invest in build to rent housing to really provide a long-term revenue income stream that they could then use their half of the revenue income stream to reinvest back into the transport network. So whilst this joint venture it's not focused on redeveloping stations in their own right, it is very much land and next to stations. I think it's just illustrating how housing especially can play a part in one, regenerating the local area next to stations and investing in that community and providing potentially new assets and new community spaces next to stations, but also providing a long-term income stream to partners to provide that long-term funding to redevelop or reinvest back into the network for the long term. So in terms of a bit more detail about this scheme, next slide please. Yeah, so in terms of what TfL get out of this scheme, there's five sites that we are developing. They've all got planning consent at the moment, and we're looking to start on site on these in the next 12-18 months or so. But there is a guaranteed minimum land value for TfL on each of these sites, in addition to a 49% share of the income for the long term. And then it's funded, in terms of funding, it's funded through a combination of Grainger and TfL equity plus third-party debt through both the development and the long-term investment phase. And there's as I said before, there's the opportunity to regenerate and invest in the adjoining stations or the station land. So and just jump to the next slide, please. You'll see that some of the schemes we're investing are developing new public squares or overstation developments in the case of the Nine Elms project, or providing new station driver facilities, or regeneration and kind of making better use of siding land alongside rail infrastructure. So I suppose it's making use of brownfield land in order to align to the political objectives at the minute in terms of densifying housing and providing new housing, which is obviously a very live topic and relevant topic at the minute with kind of the housing crisis as it is at the minute. And then yeah, so this is just giving this is our Honest Grove scheme. So which is, if you go to site now, it was historically a surface level car park. So we are taking the car park, we're providing a smaller percentage of car park, both for the public and also to facilitate the station driver requirements, and then using that land to provide a new residential scheme and a new station square, which is enhancing the experience and of the station, I suppose. So that's the scheme. And then next slide, please. And then the Nine Elms scheme, which is on the screen now, is a scheme we'll be building above the new Nine Elms tube station on the Northern Line in London. And then as part of that, as well, again, as the nearly 500 homes that will provide a long-term in-stream, there's a new public square and access point to the station that's being provided. Next slide. And then the next case study I just wanted to quickly touch on is a scheme of ours in West Berkshire, Newbury, which completed last year. And it's not a joint venture in the same way as the TfL schemes where Transport for London are kind of in the joint venture on a 50-50 basis. This is more how I suppose, illustrating how we can see housing being developed in partnership with Network Rail in this case, and West Berkshire Council as the local authority. So going back historically, this site was the station car park for Newbury Station. It wasn't a particularly efficient car park. It was all at grade car parking over quite a sprawling car park that was just, it was not a nice entry point to Newbury, and it was a car park was bridging the gap between Newbury town centre and Network and the station. So really the founding partners, West Berkshire Council and Network Rail, decided that, you know, there was a goal of regenerating this quite large piece of land, but to basically enhance the experience between getting from Newbury Station to the town centre. So the decision was made to sort of build a new multi-storey car park in one corner of the site to actually enhance the amount of parking that is provided on site, but in a much smaller footprint of land. And as part of that, and then there was a kind of, the land value on this scheme was actually the building of the car park. So it's just showing that how you can use the income and the commercials of developing new housing to actually provide elements to free up the land to develop new housing on the site. So it was a repurposing of an aging and inefficient surface level car park, and then we have built 232 new build to rent homes, which Grainger is owning and managing for the long term. But then there's also the new car park, and provided a much improved link between the station and the centre. And then as part of that, we have built a new station access road and resurfaced and regenerated that for Network Rail and Great Western as the train operating company. And there's although the commercial elements of the scheme are in Grainger's control, it's actually providing an enhanced commercial offering to the station and station users. And then I think in terms of the benefits of it, there was a monthly steering group throughout the project where kind of key representatives from all the bodies met to just talk through objectives and agree on key scheme decisions, and just making sure that all partners have that oversight to ensure that, you know, they're getting the objectives of the scheme are being met. Next slide, please. And then I think in terms of just to touch on a few lessons learned, this is probably one of Grainger's first experiences of working very closely with Network Rail. I suppose we definitely did have some key, you know, as a business, we learned from some key lessons from this, and I suppose I think the key takeaway from us was actually really getting the importance of getting an early understanding of actually how Network Rail and the train operating companies, you know, their requirements early on, and just understanding the technical details of that, which I think Richard touched on in his first presentation, because I think, and then so that there was to really eliminate program risk and also have a clear understanding of cost and keep the kind of where the risk sits from an early stage. And I think so that then everyone, it makes for a smoother delivery of schemes in the long term, really. Yes, so that was hopefully gives an overview of how housing can contribute to wider station redevelopment. Thank you.
That's great, Rebecca. Thank you very much indeed. It's really important, isn't it, that relationship between transport and housing? And you gave a really good sense of the kind of partnerships and how those are really essential in that relationship. So if I can invite the three speakers to sort of put the cameras back on, we're going to have an opportunity now. Thank you for keeping to time, because we've got a good 10 minutes or so for some questions. And the first question that came in was from Fulia Ilby. And Fulia was asking, great question on regulation. What are the major regulatory challenges in the sort of topics and the projects and the plans that we've been talking about this morning? And then I thought, a great question, how easy is it to communicate the urgency to policymakers and regulators? I don't know if someone wants to pick up some of the regulatory challenges in this space.
Well, I was going to suggest Zach, but I will kick off. So obviously there are lots of rail regulation safety requirements for stations that need to be adhered to. And the other challenges I've come across on regulation are to do with the utility regulation requirements, with the utilities for the upgrades of not only the station kit, but frankly, the energy and fibre and all of these issues that need to be put in on the utilities for these master plans. But I thought Zach might have something to say on the rail side. But Zach?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I think there's obviously a lot of different decision makers within the rail industry. At the moment, you've also got Network Rail as the station owners, you've got train operators leasing, you've obviously got the government sort of directly running rail contracts. So there's kind of 3 different levels of decision maker at the moment. And obviously within that, there's a number of different processes to go through in terms of sort of Network Rail, in terms of their station change process and landlord's consent. So I think it can make what can be sort of what seems like smaller scale developments or easy to deliver developments can become a lot more costly and a lot more bureaucratic than you might deliver in the private sector. But yeah, I think it's a really good point. And hopefully, I think the future of the industry with the formation of Great British Railways, the merging of train operators and Network Rail should make some of these processes easier. So there's kind of one consistent set of regulations that developers have to follow, as opposed to following lots of different ones with the different individual bodies.
I mean, I might just add that one of the benefits of the collaboration structures, obviously we expect Great British Railways to be a nice unifying entity to deal with. And then you have to bring in the Highways Authority as well, of course, when they're dealing with transport interchanges. And of course, you've got regulations around that. But I do think that, fingers crossed, the Great British Railway structure might be helping speed things up. Whether long term it works for investment purposes, we'll see. But certainly on ease of delivery, I think it will be net positive.
Thank you to both of you. I know I'm here to ask the questions rather than answer them. I think with my experience, very quickly, I would say that often when you think about regulatory bodies, they look like quite big beasts and difficult to infiltrate. But actually, it's often about finding the right people within those organizations to talk to and build those relationships with. And actually, that I think is a really important way of working with regulators. Got another question came in from Phil. It's a sort of wider point around active travel, really. I don't know if Zach, you wanted to pick this one up. Just what stations, local stations, are doing currently for active travel. I think the point Phil is making is that there's a long way to go on this.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I think Hadham and Tame was one of the stations that we built, I think, in the early 2000s. I think it's a really good point because with the climate emergency, I think there's a lot of stations that have been built in the last 20 years that should have more thought in terms of active travel connections. I think it's been really good to see, particularly in our network and our region, councils such as Oxford County Council, really putting the climate emergency and active travel at the forefront of new station developments. So, for example, for the Oxford United Stadium, I know they've got very limited parking on site, and the whole model, in order to get planning permission, they've really got to build that model of how they're working with the rail operator, with bus companies, but also what investment is going into active travel networks. So is it new cycle routes? Is it new walking routes to local settlements, but also connecting to sort of major centres such as Oxfordshire? So I think it's something that the rail industry is probably a little bit behind on. But actually, I think in terms of future developments, particularly on East West Rail, potentially as the operator, one of the things that we are doing is delivering sort of a new active travel plan for each of the new stations on the route. So it's definitely at the forefront of thinking in the future. But I guess the key question is, where does that investment come from? One of the things we're trying to do, because I think rail's historically not benefited from Section 106 funding in the same way that, let's say, Bus Connections has. So really shaping that thinking within council, say if you're giving planning permission for a major development or commercial development, making sure you think about rail infrastructure and that connectivity between your public highway and the active travel network with your rail stations.
Great, thank you. Richard, did you want to come in?
Yeah, funny enough, we're advising Oxford United Football Club on that station, on that stadium project with the interface with the station. And what I've noticed is with parkway stations, and indeed with some of the HS2 stations to start with in any event, is that they're not really designed to integrate with master plan schemes. They are there for transport purposes and park and ride and obviously flow of network. And so I'd quite like to see parkway stations of the future designed with future master plans in mind. So, for example, Worcestershire Parkway Station, we're building a garden community around it at the moment, which it wasn't originally designed for. And then obviously Oxford United Football Club I appreciate that you can't necessarily predict that that would have been the site for the stadium, but I think if we can design these parkway stations to allow for that future connectivity and integration, that would be beneficial. It's not all about city centres and town centres, I suppose, is the point.
Yeah, and I think kind of the future model with the, I guess, deregulation potentially of the housing and the planning process. I think those sort of parkway locations are potentially going to be sites of almost new systems in themselves. I know Oxford Parkway, I know similar Worcestershire Parkway, because we grew up in that area. The local authorities are looking at what houses can we build there, because you've got good active travel links, you've got good rail links to kind of the key towns in the city. So I think actually in a way, the parkway things were designed because they're easy to drive to and easy for people in the small villages or towns to get to without going through the city centre or congesting the city centre. But actually they might now be the settlement of or the host of new settlements, and kind of that ability to build new housing and new settlements in those areas.
Thank you very much. There've been a couple of comments and questions around kind of availability of the material afterwards. I'm pretty certain in saying that this webinar is going to be available to kind of re-watch and go back into. So I'm pretty certain the slides and the material is going to be available after this. So I'll just make that point for those that wanted to kind of revisit this. I've got one question, if I may, as well. Rebecca and Richard in particular talked a lot about partnerships. I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about kind of what you feel is the biggest challenge when it comes to creating those partnerships. I know you touched on it in your presentations, but if you were to sort of pick out just kind of one or two, is it money? Is it people? Is it culture? Is it structures? And kind of how we overcome that? I mean, what's the biggest kind of obstacle you think to creating those partnerships? I don't know if Rebecca, you want to go first, and then Richard.
Yeah, I mean, think from our experience, I mean, it's building those relationships, like personal relationships from an early stage, and keeping that contact consistently, and throughout, in terms of both from a formal perspective, but also informally, and just it's almost one of the elements of our TfL joint venture that has worked really well. And I mean, it wouldn't be appropriate for all partners. I appreciate that, but actually we're jointly development managing a lot of the projects. So actually we have a counterpart in TfL who it's almost like we're developing as one business. And I think that has actually it allows both sides' expertise to be brought to the table in a way that it wouldn't ordinarily be, because it's not like your side and our side. It is very much a team mentality, and that is actually, and especially with from a Grange perspective and a developer perspective, understanding all the the complexities of the station approval processes, that has been just invaluable in terms of getting a clear idea of cost, program, and managing those expectations from the off. So I think it is developing those relationships on a one-to-one basis from the start would be my view.
Yes, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I think as on my slide deck on the first slide about the sheer number of stakeholders involved, that's the complexity with stations, because you've got a lot of people to deal with, but you have got reasonably decent land values normally, because obviously you're generating a lot of transport connectivity, and you also tend to have the support of the local planning authority and the local highways authority, because they see the public transport benefit looming large. I think sometimes the land ownerships take time to bring together in a composite. So, shared value was one of my key messages, rather than, land value capture, which is a sort of government mantra. Developers and landowners don't particularly like land value capture because it's partly their value. So what they want to do is share the value and share the proceeds, share the reward. But, these structures that we've all talked about, they are happening, there are lots of them. So the future is definitely positive in this regard. And I think Northern Powerhouse Rail, East West Rail, Parkway stations, and then town and city centre regeneration projects, there are a lot of them. And I think the lessons learned, are feeding their way into these updates to these sort of toolkits on how to deliver them. So I'm very positive about the future.
Thank you very much indeed. I've got one other question I'm going to ask you, and this isn't to tempt you to make a kind of political point, but obviously we had a new government, came into place in the UK last year, new Labour government after many years of Conservative. Anything you're noticing by way of kind of key differences and things that are coming out of the new government, and then sort of what those opportunities are, you think, for the next few years? Obviously, before we won't have another election for a while, we trust. So yeah, any sense of what you're seeing with the kind of the new government at the moment?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I mean, lots of activity. So this area of development, growth, infrastructure is obviously one of the key focuses of this government. Obviously, they've had a budget that's caused a few issues, but in essence, this is their number one focus area. It's an area of integration. So I think we're seeing a lot of activity, willingness to look at all of the toolkit options that have been explored in the past and reignite them. So government-backed guarantees back on the table, equity investments back on the table. Obviously, there's a queue and an assessment set of criteria to get involved from the public sector interventions. But, the appetite is there. Whether the cash is there is dependent upon growth. So I think the planning reforms are very significant. The land assembly reforms are significant. So pretty active. I don't know what Rebecca and Zach feel, but certainly from my perspective, it has been full steam ahead in terms of analysis of projects. And of course, waiting for the cash is the key concern.
I agree, and I think there's been a lot of, over the last sort of best part of the year, there's been a lot of all the conversations and discussions, and the intent has been sort of right and positive in terms of, especially from a housing perspective, in terms of streamlining that process and really trying to removing some of the barriers. I think the next 12 months is going to be particularly key in terms of actually, are these things actually they haven't actually been rolled out in practice yet, so I think it's going to be a really sort of interesting 12 months or so, I suppose, to actually, all the right things are being said, but actually it's not actually getting to the point of being put into place at the moment. So I think it's a bit too early to say whether it's going to be a success or not, really, from our perspective.
Well, I think from a kind of purely rail perspective, I think obviously everybody in the rail industry recognises that reform is needed. I think from a development property perspective, it'd be interesting to see. I think you mentioned earlier, Richard, when Great British Railways gets created, how that works, how the kind of regional decision making is made, but also how they're going to leverage private investment into the rail industry. Because I think bringing together train operators network rail on paper sounds like the right thing to do to simplify the industry, to potentially reduce dividends, etc., being paid to the private companies. But actually, how are we going to utilise that kind of private investment for rail infrastructure, whether that is building new stations, it's building things like East West Rail, or upgrading existing infrastructure. So whether it's complementary housing or commercial developments, they've got the capacity and the transport to support them.
Thank you. This is a subject that we will come back to, I'm sure, many, many times. I'm really appreciating your input today from the three of you. I know that the hour has gone quick, and we've covered a lot of ground, but it's been great to have that discussion. Few thank yous from me. I mean, my thanks to Rebecca, to Martina, and to Maxine from Waterfront Conferences, who've been organising this. I know they're working on the face-to-face conference coming up in the summer as well, so look out for that. But also my thanks to the three people that you see on the screen here as well today: Richard Ford, Zach Bailey, and Rebecca Crow. Thank you for your input. Thank you for the discussion that we've had. And yeah, we will meet again, I'm sure, and discuss this in the coming weeks and months. But thank you very much indeed for your time.